just a brief introduction. So Minu, thank you so much for that introduction. And Tamika, thank you so much for sharing your very touching story. At the age of 25, that must have been quite a shock for you. And look what you've done with it. Congratulations. So my name is Benda, as you've heard. I'm from KILELE Health, and I'm presenting all the way from Kenya, Nairobi. And welcome to all of you who are joining us from all over the world. I'm delighted to be here because when the conversation for elevating survivors came up and I was invited to speak, I was conflicted. I had two options. One, I could speak, or I could invite one of the survivors that we are working with. And then I noticed that Tamika had been invited to bring the voice of the survivors on the table. And so I took the opportunity to speak into what we're doing to elevate survivors' voices in cervical cancer elimination. And I will tell you why this matters. Please, next slide. This month, June, is commemorated globally as a National Cancer Survivors Day, 4th of June. But in Kenya, we celebrate it as a full month of action in survivorship and commemorating and supporting and celebrating survivors. Just on the 4th of June, the National Cancer Control Program held a commemorative day in Thika Level 5 Hospital. And the survivors were there being celebrated, as well as giving opportunities for people to get screened so that they can prevent cervical cancer. In KILELE, we honored survivorship on the 3rd of June, the way we know how to, by going for a hike, and the survivors and the caregivers who were on the hike that day enjoyed a cake to celebrate together. Next slide. Minu, as well as Tamika, have spoken into the WHO call for elimination of cervical cancer. And as the topic was about involving survivors or engaging survivors or enhancing their voices, I just wanted to touch base a little bit on what it means for elimination. WHO has indicated that for us to reach the elimination goal in 100 years, and that is 97 years from now because 3 years have elapsed, we need to reach 90% of vaccination for all girls against HPV, that is all eligible girls by the age of 15. We need to reach 70% of screening for all women who are eligible at least twice in their lifetime with high performance tests. And thirdly, we need to be able to treat at least 90% of all women who are found to have anything suspicious in their cervix so that we can eliminate cervical cancer. And you're wondering what those animals at the base are all about. I'll tell you, whenever I think about the WHO call for elimination, I often think that we have different phases, different timelines, yet we are gearing towards the 2030. There are some countries and regions that are like the hare or the rabbit. They can run to the finish line very quickly because they've already introduced HPV vaccination for their girls since, I think, as soon as the vaccine was introduced. And these are the countries that are going at super speed towards elimination. We have other countries that are going at snail's pace, which is right now trying to introduce HPV vaccination, right now trying to put in place mechanisms for screening, right now having national programs for screening, and even working towards treatment for women found with precancerous lesions or even found to have anything suspicious so that we can be able to treat or palliate for invasive cancer. And then there are those countries that I call, so those are the snail pace countries that are slowly walking towards the elimination goal for 2030. Then there are those countries that I like to call either the mountain or the rock, and it's not supposed to be flattering at all. These are countries that are still struggling with getting the vaccination started, or even if it started, having to deal with mountains of disinformation and misinformation that prevents girls from getting the vaccine. There are countries that are still grappling with how to introduce high performance testing. And there are some countries that don't even know that self-sample collection, for example, is an option. And these populations are still expected to reach the 2030 goals of 90, 70, 90. There are countries, sadly, that do not even have the means or the capability to treat. Therefore, we are talking about, for example, Africa has 19 of the 20 countries that were labeled in 2018 as the leading countries in cervical cancer incidence. Yet, in Africa, we have less than 25 countries that have introduced vaccination. And we have majority of the countries don't even have radiation therapy or access to brachytherapy. And these are necessary for prevention. So when I say we have the hares and the rabbits, we have the snails, and then we have the rocks, the rock needs to start being moved and somebody has to take the action, because Tamika said, we have the tools, we have the ability, the technologies, but not all countries have that. And yet we all need to reach the finish line together. Next slide. So at KILELE, one of the things that we do very well is climb mountains and move rocks so that we can be able to see that the survivor's voice is brought to the core. I came into this field because my sister was told she had cervical cancer at the age of 27. That was 2010. That's 13 years ago. At 2010, even I, who is pretty well exposed, had gone only once for a pap smear and left the results in the doctor's office. And when I came out, I never went back for those results. 2010, when that news was broken to me, the question that I asked myself is, when she was treated, we found out it was pre-cancer of the cervix, she was treated, she never lost her fertility, unlike Tamika, who had to go through the whole treatment trajectory. My sister went on to have a baby. And that put a pause for me, like, how can this possibly be true? In which case then, at that point in time, I started my advocacy journey. And I worked in advocacy for 9 years until 2019, when a very dear friend of mine who was a survivor, who worked with me in the trenches in survivorship and in cervical cancer advocacy, actually died of a cervical cancer recurrence. And that was heart-rending for me, because I kept thinking, once cancer is treated, it's gone, we will not have to deal with it. And therein, I was exposed to the question of survivorship. And that's when I started dealing with the question of, where are the survivors? In Kenya alone, we have the incidence. We say that we have 42,000 people, over 42,000 people diagnosed annually. And out of that, 27,000 lose their lives. Not many people, up to and including 2020, were talking about the 15,000 every year who are surviving. And this is a resource that already knows the health system. They already know what's hurting. They already know where to access the care. They already have a lived experience that could inspire somebody else to go for prevention. And they have voices that can be utilized for advocacy. And that's why KILELE came in and said, we can live a life beyond those limits that have been set around healthcare systems, around disinformation, for us to be able to demystify cervical cancer and get people to prevent. Next slide, please. So how do we do it? Our principle in KILELE is we recruit survivors no matter what cancer type they have gone through. We also recruit caregivers, people who have gone through the journey with their loved ones. Maybe their loved one is still alive and well and doing their advocacy in their own way, or their loved one has passed on and they're looking for a channel on how to be able to harness the knowledge and the skill that they have. We train our survivors and caregivers in storytelling for impact, in advocacy. We train them so that we can equip them with knowledge, skills, and expertise to go and speak loudly and vocally and with evidence base on survivorship, on prevention, on signs and symptoms, so that we're able to equip them as voices of change in the community. Next, we mentor our survivors. I have technical experts, and even I myself take my time to make sure that when a survivor calls me, I drop whatever I'm doing so that we can have the conversation around what they're dealing with, what they need to do next, and how they can harness that experience, be it that it's an advocacy question on policy or survivorship issue on mental wellness or issues that they're facing at that time. And lastly, we deploy our survivors. We make sure that we give them opportunities that are valuable. So what you're seeing is our 3 pillars of work. We have the mountain. We climb Mount Kenya every year, and that's how we recruit our survivors. Because once somebody has gone on and faced the mountain, or even taken the time to say, I'm committing to this journey, we know they're already committed to advocacy. We do the training and we expose our survivors to varied experiences, varied persons. For example, getting eminent persons or speakers on our survivorship symposium, so that they are able to hear others speak, they're able to gain skills and knowledge, and they're also able to be exposed to research so that they can be able to utilize their voices. Lastly, we equip them with knowledge and skills for self-sustenance so that they are not working for free in the field of advocacy, but they are able to monetize their skill. Next screen, please. So you're asking yourself, why is this necessary? I can tell you, in our work, we've seen how by sharing the stories, survivors have changed the behaviors of others by getting them to understand, I too can do this. I can change my life. I can go get screened. We are also encouraging health-enhancing behaviors for people to seek more information. We are also having them speak positively to reduce stigma. For the longest time, we had that cancer is a death sentence. But when we get a survivor of pancreatic cancer who has lived for over 12, 13 years, talk to people and say, I was screened early, I recovered, I'm better now. That is reducing the stigma. We offer social support as a group, but we also encourage our survivors, no matter where you are, join a support group so that you're able to also inspire others to use their voices for support. And lastly, we restore confidence, because communities often tend to ostracize and stigmatize people living with cancer. But when somebody then comes and says, I climb Mount Kenya, or I'm an advocate, I spoke to the CS for health, or I'm an advocate, I'm in the newspapers, it changes their perception, and now they are becoming more empowered to use their lived experiences. But there is a benefit to involving survivors as well. It enriches their quality of life, because we are addressing the physical, mental, and emotional health needs. It also restores dignity, a purpose for living because they are helping others, and a belief in humanity because they are seeing themselves now as empowered persons who can be able to make a difference. Next, please. As I'm about to finish, I want to tell you just a little bit about a project that we have embarked on. After climbing mountains, after training survivors, the question that was on the table was, and then what? And so we innovated a solution for KILELE, which is our Thamani project. We're targeting to reach 4 million women and girls by 2027, with screening for women who are eligible, with awareness and education for the community, and lastly, with vaccination for girls, access to vaccination. We are working with the Embu County. It's a small county in Embu, one of the 47 counties in Kenya, supported by Prevent Cancer Foundation, Hologic, MSD, and we're still looking for other partners. We are engaging our survivors to utilize their lived experiences to go to the community and reach the multitudes about cervical cancer, engaging the healthcare system to train the healthcare workers, the community health volunteers with knowledge and experience for them to be able to reach the unreached women. We're engaging healthcare clinicians to be able to give their technical expertise as volunteers so that we can meet the target to reach 40,000 people with knowledge and skill. And lastly, our survivors play the role of navigation so that if we find any woman, they can be taken to the level of care that they deserve so that we don't lose anyone to care. Why this is important is I would ask of you, when you work with survivors, when you're recruiting your survivors, treat them with respect and dignity. Train so that they can be able to utilize their knowledge and skills well. Simplify. Let's avoid the medical jargon that I often hear, which is thrown out there, and then you find that the survivor is feeling lost, and especially if you're working with persons who are coming from low income resources and not necessarily gone to the highest level of education. Let's not stigmatize. Be purposeful in including survivors. And being purposeful is also matching their skill set to their expertise or upskilling them so that they're able to be meaningfully engaged. Make no assumptions. The quality of life is important, and also their lived experience is important. But lastly, pay survivors when they appear for speaking engagements, for advocacy engagements, for whatever you call them to do. They also have value to contribute. Monetize. Last screen, please. So I would ask, kindly skip that one. I've already spoken into that. Kindly, thank you. I would ask of you, as you're also engaging, we invite you to engage with us. You may reach me via email. I've already posted it there. You may reach my organization on our social media, or you can join us to climb Mount Kenya. Thank you so much for your time.